In order for you to scale, you've got to hire someone that can steal your job. My best career advice I can give to anybody is steal your boss's job. Do it in a respectful and a great way, but do the thing they're not good at. Do the thing they don't like to do and do it really, really well. And over time, that stuff gets noticed. I don't think there's any career ladder or anything that would get you further than just doing that simple rule.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Thank you, Fat Joe, and welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, my guest is John McCauley, the CFO of Calendly. John comes from the Frank Slootman and Mike Scarpelli School of Management, having helped take ServiceNow public a decade ago. On this episode, we cover what he learned working for Frank and a few funny stories from their interactions. Spoiler alert, he got to drive Frank's Porsche. The concept of businesses being a team, not a family. The value of brand equity and how the Calendly name helps drive the company's viral coefficient. How to track a product-led growth motion in your metrics. Why benchmarks can be overrated, misleading, and a tool for misjudgment in the wrong hands. Why M&A rarely seems to work out well for private tech companies. And how the CFO needs to take responsibility for total company performance. John tells a story about how he got his first at-bat as CFO at Seismic, what that meant for him, and how he went about making it a successful run. What I like about John is he's someone who seeks healthy confrontation and honesty in every org he works at. And he realizes that the ultimate reason we work is to create successful wealth outcomes for our families and the families of our employees. The tech world could use more Frank Slootmans right now, and they could also use a few more John McCauleys. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Financial operations are needlessly complex. Startups have to cobble together a patchwork of tools to reconcile transactions from different sources, work to get a holistic view of cash flow and how it maps to company priorities, and struggle to glean answers from platforms that speak different languages. Simplicity can transform your business operations. That's why Mercury powers your financial workflows from the bank account so you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 100,000 ambitious startups that trust Mercury. I like that. Not just for banking and credit cards, but for the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows and perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I always want to do that voice. Quick math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. And back by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, you know your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please do it, guys. I really need this. John, welcome to the #3 business podcast in Trinidad and Tobago.
I'm glad to be here. I have a big following in that neck of the woods.
We're trying to expand there, so I knew I had to have you on.
Well, I'll bring you 4 listeners here in the United States. My wife and one of my kids won't listen, but 3 of them will. So I'm bringing you 4. So I'm happy to contribute that. Also, CJ, I'll contribute all the SDRs that are going to listen to this so that they can make more informed and specific emails to me. So.
This is the product-led growth motion I've been going for, so thank you for the support.
Yes.
John, so you hail from the famous Frank Slootman and Mike Scarpelli coaching trees. It's kind of like you got to play for both Belichick and Mike Shanahan here. Having cut your teeth at ServiceNow, can you talk about any of the frameworks that they may have taught you that stick with you to this day?
When you think about how I get introduced to Frank and Mike, it actually starts with someone that we both know named Lindsay Bennett. Lindsay and I worked together at Ernst & Young and then at Illumina, a genomics company here in San Diego. And she called me and she's like, hey, you got to check out this ServiceNow, this little tiny company. This guy, Frank Slootman, he's kind of a big deal. He just joined the company and you should take a look. And from there I met Mike. And so I owe everything to Lindsay, who was a great mentor to me early.
Shout out to Lindsay. Yeah.
Early in my career, who's now the chief accounting officer at Sneak. So I go and I meet Mike and we hit it off. And I think the thing that I remember the most about that point in my career is, I had been at Ernst & Young, which is a pretty stodgy, firm, great firm, but, it's a pretty old school. And then Illumina had a pretty old school culture as well. And I never felt like I fit in there very much. I always kind of want to push the envelope. Like I kind of seek conflict in the way that I work personally, because I think that can create better outcomes for the company. And working with Mike in particular, it would probably be a stretch to say that I work directly with Frank on a day-to-day business. I love Frank and I learned a heck of a lot from him, but I would be surprised if he knew who the hell I was. It was really Mike who drove everything. And I found like my people there, like the way that I was naturally orientated towards like kind of pushing the envelope and being a driver by nature. I just fit in with them a lot. So that focus on driving versus passenger, it's kind of cliche now, but I don't like to just come with the problem. I like to come with the problem and the solution, even if the solution is something that's quite radical. And I think they really sponsored that point of view and taught me that, and really pushed for ideas to come from anywhere. It didn't matter what your title was, and that worked really well for me. I also think that in Mike's staff meetings, for example, like he really was seeking conflict in terms of people should feel free to come to the room with the things they see in the business that aren't working and try to work through the solutions with their fellow managers. And so I really took that away. I also think that Mike did a phenomenal job of rewarding results. It didn't matter, what your title was or how many years you had in your career or what college you went to. He was really looking for people that would help him drive to better outcomes. And I think that's why we clicked and why I was able to move up the ranks very quickly with Mike, because he sponsored that. And I certainly carry that forward. I think the one last thing that you can see out of that group of guys is that if you look at the executive team that they were together at Data Domain, they went together to ServiceNow, and mostly they went with each other to Snowflake. And so that continuity of that executive team and the continuity of the people that you work with can be a real force multiplier if you can keep the band together. And they did a tremendous job of that. And they had a unique relationship that I think put them at an advantage relative to other executive teams I've seen. So I feel extremely lucky that I've crossed paths with him. I have a funny story about Frank in particular. ServiceNow moved from San Diego up to the Bay Area. And when we moved, Frank needed someone to drive his car from San Diego up to the Bay Area. And, maybe a little bit of brown nosing, but as soon as I heard that, I'm like, absolutely, like I'm your guy. So I got to drive Frank's Porsche from San Diego to San Francisco. And there was one condition, is that I got to drive it along the coast, through Big Sur, through San Simeon.
Wow.
And there I was, like a young 30-year-old in a very, very nice car. And that's my Frank story.
Were you worried about crashing it? Like he was very results oriented.
Yeah, I think Frank could have handled it if I crashed it. Maybe he would have just got a new one.
From the outside in, something that's always resonated with me about how I've heard they run their teams is that they look at it like they're trying to put the best people on the floor at any given time, and that it's very much a performance culture. And I think sometimes companies get over their skis with saying, hey, we're all a family here. We're all family, blah, 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 blah. But then when push comes to shove, you figure out that wasn't the case all along. And they always just call it like it is. Like, we're here to drive revenue and to drive free cash flows, like point blank. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's somewhat of a disappointing time for Frank to hang it up. He recently retired and moved to a chairman role at Snowflake. But I think the software industry needs Frank Slootman more than ever right now. There is a lot of cupcakes and sunshine in software. I think that's starting to go away a little bit now that we're in 2024. But that was not Frank. Frank, I think, had a a popular quote, I don't know if it is his, but he's like, we're not into, back rubs and free lunches. We're into equity appreciation. And so, we were willing to forego all of those little perks. But the thing that we care deeply about is at the time of the IPO or any, round of financing is that we were printing millionaires. And that was meaningful to people's lives. And I think that's what gets Frank going more than anything. And it's really commendable.
That gets the right type of people out of bed in the morning, right? Like rewarding that performance.
Yeah.
On the finance side, you worked closely with Mike day to day. Did he have any sayings or isms that he would drop, like when he walked into a room? Anything that stuck with you, like, oh, that's another Scarpelli quote?
Like more of like a point of view, but it was, it's okay to make mistakes, but don't make the same mistake twice. So long as you were really transparent about the mistakes that you made and you did not kind of habitually make them, I think Mike did a really good job. And look, I made a ton of mistakes working for him and with him. I actually have a funny story here as well, and I think I'm allowed to tell the story. But so Morgan Stanley ran the IPO for ServiceNow, and we did our analyst day at their office. And if anybody who knows where that office is, so up in the Bay Area, there's Sand Hill Road. It goes by Stanford, goes by all the big VCs. Every one of them's got an office on it, and you get to the end, and there's a Morgan Stanley office and the Rosewood Hotel. It's like this kind of. It's kind of this metaphorical move through the technology world, and you get to Morgan Stanley for your IPO. So there we are at the vaunted grounds of Morgan Stanley, and we have our analyst day, which during the IPO process, what you do is you get the sell side together and you teach them about your business. And so that's where we were, and we were holding it there. And we get into the meeting, which is about a 4-hour meeting, and about 5 minutes into the meeting, all the analysts are peppering Frank and Mike with questions about kind of ACV growth, over time. They'd be like, back in, 2000, you had this ACV and it moved to this. And I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, that's super weird. They're asking those questions because we had decided we were not going to disclose ACV to anybody. It wasn't going to be part of our KPIs, and it's not the way that we drove the business. And therefore, it wouldn't be a core element of our S1. And so I go into my email that I had sent out to the contingency that was there the day before. I sent them the wrong file. I sent the one that had all the ACV data in it. And we're 5 minutes into like a 4-hour meeting, and I go, oh my goodness, I sent them the wrong file, and they have all the data that we did not intend to give them. So I text Lindsay, our friend Lindsay, who's sitting right next to Mike, and I just see her face when she picks up her phone. She goes, oh boy. And I see her tap Mike on the shoulder, and she just shows him his phone. We're in a meeting where they're being peppered with questions. Mike looks up from his phone and he just shakes his head at me, and the meeting proceeds and continues to go on. So I'm sitting there for 3 hours just sweating bullets, thinking I've lost my job, it's over, we're probably going to have to file an 8K, and all these things that are going through my head the whole time. It turns out, Frank and Mike were very gracious for that mistake. We were able to move on from it. It wasn't the biggest deal in the world. It was just the historical data, and going forward, we still weren't going to do ACV. But that was a moment where, that was a big, big mistake. And sometimes, one lesson from that is, mistakes happen when you're engaged in heroics. So, during an IPO, you're staying up till 2, 3 in the morning, just grinding away to get work done. And hey, that's where mistakes happen more frequently. And so that was a big, big mistake, CJ.
Mistakes happen when you're engaged in heroics. That's a clip. I only have one Mike Scarpelli interaction, and I still think about this late at night to this day. So he was the chair of our audit committee when I was at Sneak, and I was running FP&A. And I remember we had to present like a forecast to him, and our ARR forecast was really using CAR. So it was using like the exit value on the deals. It was back in 2021 where everybody was doing this stuff. And then GAAP revenue, like there was a big gap, no pun intended, between the two, and it kept growing over time. And for like 10 minutes straight. And by the way, I was like pumped for this meeting. I was like, I'm going to get FaceTime. I remember I wore this nice new Bonobos button up that had different colors of sharks on it. And so for like 10 minutes, he goes in on like why this is the bad forecast, like why it's not predictable, why it's not like representing durable revenue growth. The entire time I'm standing there in the room, like I shouldn't have worn this fucking shark shirt.
That's So good. By the way, this is why we didn't disclose ACV. Like not to bring back a funny story to something real, but like it was this thing. It was this thing that wasn't really definable at that time. This was a long time ago, right? And so the nuance of how you defined it is like, no, our GAAP financials are use our revenue. There it is, and you can look at deferred revenue to figure out the future. And but yeah, so Mike will pick things apart that aren't really definable and aren't understandable, and he'll just throw them out. Like why are you showing me this number? It makes no sense.
Yeah. So two things. To this day, I use ARR, not CAR, and number two, I don't wear shirts with sharks on them anymore.
If you don't mind, I'll tell you one more Scarpelli story.
Okay,
it relates to dress. When I joined Seismic, Mike referred me in there. And I think Mike's always had a little thing against San Diego, laid back surfers. You gotta be in the
chill
Bay Area
dudes.
you got to be in the Bay Area to drive your career. And so he said, look, I'm going to refer you into the Seismic job, but if you get it, you're going to dress like a professional. You're going to be a CFO. Like you're going to dress business casual every day. I'm like, fine, like I'll do that to get this job. And so I'm like 6 months into my job at Seismic, and someone finally asked me, they're like, why do you dress like that every day? Like, everybody thinks you're pretentious and like you're standoffish because you're dressing like that. And like everybody else is in board shorts. And I swear I stuck by this every day. I wore this business casual, but it's because I had made this commitment to Mike. And then I ran into Mike a couple of years later, and he was, it was an office setting, and he was in jeans and a button up. And he's like, oh yeah, I don't do that anymore either. He's like, you don't have to do that anymore. So he always was on me about my dress, and kind of always kind of like, not in a serious way, but making fun of, kind of San Diego culture.
Oh man, thanks for sharing that. That was awesome. It actually segues me nice into my next question, because I talk about the importance on this podcast about like getting an at-bat, and I actually heard you use the same term, and it stuck with me, because to become a CFO, you need someone to take a chance on you, and then you need to take a chance on them. Can you just talk about like the mindset of going into your first CFO role?
Yeah, so Seismic was a JMI portfolio company. So was ServiceNow. So, and so Scarpelli had connections at JMI, and I think they reached out to him for this role, and he introduced me to it. So it was through kind of that network of that. I think there's a reoccurring theme throughout my career. There's a pretty nice network that I just happened to be in, and I'm lucky. I feel extremely fortunate to be in that network. And so I get introduced to Seismic. I meet Doug Winter, who's the CEO there, and yeah, he took a bet. We just had a really great meeting, and I think we knew that we were meant to work with each other during that period of time. And so I just feel very lucky to have learned to have landed at Seismic, and for Doug to have taken that bet on me. I think the thing that maybe got me that job was, I'm a decent financial professional, but I don't think that's my superpower. I think the ability to relate with the employees and tell the story of the company in a way that's relatable, and be a little bit pragmatic in my decision making. I think when you're a CFO that comes out of enterprise SaaS, you have to be pretty flexible in how you approach things. Given that you're going to get pressure from the sales team to get deals done, sometimes you're going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, a limit of liability, right? You're going to have to push that sometimes or do that stuff. And so I think that I had a pragmatic approach that fit really well with the Seismic culture. Seismic also had 4 founders at it.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And they were very blue collar in nature. They weren't like this white collar, stodgy ivory tower group. They were like very blue collar. And I really love those people. I'm still friends with them to this day, each one of them. And I think I just fit in really well with them. So, and I'm forever grateful for all of them for giving me that first shot. And I know that there are a lot of financial professionals that are tremendous, better than me. And I'm just the lucky guy that got an opportunity. But anytime I got an opportunity, CJ, I busted after it to go make it a reality. So, there's an element of luck in there, but there's also the chutzpah to go after something once you're given that opportunity. I think that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I've always felt in my career, if somebody opens the door an inch for me, like I'm going to pry that door open. And once I get inside, like just let me try to get into the room, and then I can do the rest from there. And I think it's making the most of those opportunities. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. As a SaaS CFO, I know firsthand how difficult it is to prepare your business for funding. It's not enough to simply know your metrics. You need to be able to tell the story of your business. That's why I'm so excited to partner with the sponsor of today's episode, Maxio, the leading billing and financial operations platform for B2B SaaS. Maxio helps finance teams at top SaaS companies like Chili Piper, Crunchbase, and Stack Overflow get cash in the door faster, automate revenue recognition, and tell their stories with investor-grade metrics. Love it! By building all of your SaaS metrics off the same data set as your financials, you'll avoid major headaches when telling your story to investors and your board. So whether you need to get funded, stay funded, or impress your board, aren't we all trying to do that? Visit maxio.com/run the numbers to supercharge your financial operations in 2024. Not only does requesting a demo using the Run the Numbers link help support the podcast, ya boy, you'll also receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. Please do it. It will be awesome. That's maxio.com/run the numbers, maxio.com/run the numbers. Woo!
Yeah, I think in recent years, you've seen this kind of like, I don't even relate to it in any way, this anti-hustle culture thing. Like I just don't relate to it in any way. I'm sure there's people who have built careers through the hallways of Stanford and Harvard that maybe, I don't know, like maybe they have a different perspective. You know, I'm a San Diego State guy. And so I would encourage people to ignore all that chatter about, you know, anti-hustle culture and hustle your butt.
Yeah. It's not cool to try anymore.
Yeah. I have a very visceral reaction to that stuff, and I see it, and it's just not who I am. So I know one way to do it. I'm sure there's plenty of other ways, but every successful person I've come across had to do ungodly things to get to where they are.
Yeah. What kept you up those first few days or quarters at Seismic?
I think navigating that four-founder thing could be daunting at times. The big personalities that you had to maneuver your way through. And so that could be challenging at times. I think that whole imposter syndrome thing is a real thing, and I think everybody feels it. And I guess if you ever get yourself into a position where you're feeling imposter syndrome, I think you're in the right spot, because that means you're pushing what you can possibly get done. And so I relished in it, and I still relish in those when they come across, you know, my bow. They still come across my bow, you know, to this day, where I feel like I'm putting myself in a spot where I'm not like specifically positioned to crush at it at that moment, but gosh, I'm going to learn from it and get better over time. I also think what kept me up at night was the kind of the pedigree of the finance organization there. Fine people, really smart, could do good stuff, but they certainly did not have that, you know, public experience. And my mandate was to drive that company towards being prepared for an IPO. And so sometimes when you start in a new job as a CFO, don't be surprised if you are handed a good team, but a team that's certainly not the exact right team to get you to what you were brought in to do. Right. And so that can be really, really daunting at times. I was extraordinarily lucky to get my first hire right, which was like a VP of finance type. Her name's Shahara Jason. Following that Frank Slootman model, she is still with me here at Calendly, and I'm lucky to get to work with her every day. Getting those hires right out of the gates for those senior leader roles is so critical to your success over time, and I happen to get it exactly right. So
we spoke with Ivan Makarov, who's at Webflow leading the finance team there, and now he's an operating partner at A16Z, and he was saying, CJ, like the first 3 hires you make on the finance team, spend the most time vetting them, leave no stone unturned, because they will dictate the culture of how like a 50-person finance org can evolve to. Like they are the seeds for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that if you're in your first CFO role, it is the normal to be inheriting something that's not working really well. So don't think of yourself as an outlier if you inherit a situation that's pretty bad. I mean, you gotta figure it out and get through it. You're not the outlier, you're the norm. And that's why you were brought in the first place. And so, I think I just got extraordinarily lucky with this one particular hire. I got a lot of hires right. I got some wrong. And that is correct. In order for you to scale, you've got to hire someone that can steal your job. Because, you know, ultimately, my best career advice I can give to anybody is steal your boss's job. You know, do it in a respectful and a great way, but do the thing they're not good at. Do the thing they don't like to do, and do it really, really well. And over time, that stuff gets noticed. I don't think there's any career ladder or anything that would get you further than just doing that simple rule. And I happen to surround myself with people that I certainly feel are, you know, smarter and better than me in every way, and they push me every day. So I think it's great.
It sounds like you were good at identifying what maybe your boss didn't like to do and then said, hey, I'm going to make that my thing.
I do my best there. Like I try to follow that myself and think about what you're doing if you do that. Like one, you're making your boss's job easier, but two, you're learning a skill set that is the level up from where you are. And so, and if you think about the cascading impact of that across an organization where everybody's doing that to everybody, think about the force multiplier that creates in the organization where everybody's pushing to the next level up. I think that it is just a really critical part to scaling a company.
And I think the third thing that comes out of that is selfishly, you get invited to a lot of meetings that you probably wouldn't be in the room for because you're essentially like the comfort blanket for something that they don't like to do. And the comfort blanket gets taken on important trips.
Yeah. Think about the value proposition of yourself as an employee. Like we think about value prop when it comes to product. Like, yeah, you're going to get invited to those meetings if you have shown a history of creating value in those meetings, or you're going to get promoted if your value prop is such that the company couldn't stand doing business without you, right? And so I think you got to kind of approach your career in the way that a product manager would approach launching a product. Is like, it's not incumbent upon other people to like think that you're valuable. It's incumbent upon for you to show your value over time.
Yeah. Find a way to get plugged in. I want to shift gears a bit to talk about Calendly because I love the company. I love the product and everybody knows who Calendly is, which I think is incredible. And with most CFOs, we talk about equity from a cap table perspective. I want to talk about a different type of equity. Can you just speak to brand equity and what that brings you at Calendly?
Yeah. So prior in my career, like Ernst & Young, Illumina, ServiceNow, Seismic, these are all large organizations bigger than Calendly. I mean, you talk to your friends or your family, you say like, "Oh, I work at ServiceNow," and people are like, "What? What's that?" And it's a large organization doing a lot of things, but no one knows what the heck it is. Calendly, on the other hand, is a relatively smaller organization, growing and getting bigger, but it's relatively small. But gosh, when you go to your kid's soccer game and you say, "I'm the CFO at Calendly," people are like, "No way!" Like you just jumped up a couple notches in their book because they're all pretty. They understand what Calendly is and they use it. There's roughly 20 million people on the platform, and we book a lot of meetings every single day. And so this is ingrained in a way. It's kind of like a verb, like kind of like you're going to go Google something, like shoot me your Calendly. And so that brand equity is a true asset of the organization. It doesn't show up on the balance sheet per se, but it is legitimate, and it is a core part of how we grow the business. And it's something that we're, all pretty proud of, to know that we work at a company that is driving so much. I think the business outcome of it is what I would call the viral coefficient of the organization. So the way that Calendly's technology works is, you can, at the heart of it is a scheduling link. There's a lot of features around it that help you, but when you set a meeting on Calendly, it will send an invite, to the person that is joining that meeting that is branded with Calendly, and it has a convenient link to it and says, "Hey, you love Calendly, sign up here." And so for every meeting that we book, we know that has a certain propensity to lead to another sign up, which leads to, a subscription. And so the whole business works on that brand equity and that viral coefficient. And it's a really remarkable business in that the cost of customer acquisition is extraordinarily low, which allows us to grow the company without having to put in the types of dollars that other organizations have to put into sales and marketing. So the brand equity is a true asset here at Calendly.
It reminds me a lot of how when someone will send an email and it says sent from my iPhone.
Yeah, or another one that I think a lot about, and maybe I'm showing how old I am, but back when Hotmail first came out, Hotmail, when you would use the Hotmail product, you could not change the signature on it. And it was like, "Hey, you like this email? Sign up for a Hotmail account." And so I think that, this has been pioneered from the very early, stages of software. And I think it's a really incredible kind of go-to-market motion.
Sometimes I get distracted on the show and I bring up something completely random, but I've always thought like the most subtle flex is when you email someone who's like on your cap table and maybe they're like an important angel investor, or they were like a 3-time founder who exited, and it's like dave@hotmail.com. Like they were just that freaking important that they couldn't change it because everyone would lose contact with them.
Yeah, I think I oftentimes think about not the exact same thing. So this is another non sequitur, but like you're sending out board materials and it's often to like Gmail accounts because that's what the board members use. And you're like, gosh, this is the kind of like some confidential information I'm sending it to the Gmail. It is a flex to have a Gmail or a Hotmail or probably run into a good Yahoo.
I keep mine around for that reason. Just I'm betting on myself to get to that point. John, we talked about how awesome it is from a customer acquisition perspective, but do you ever run into headwinds when it comes to tracking attribution or just figuring out how to measure the go-to-market motion?
So a lot of my career was spent on the enterprise SaaS side, right? And so it's a very different business model where it's more about the contract you have with the customer. You kind of, you do a lot of customization for customers. The contract term is usually at least 1 year, but oftentimes 3 years because they're making a bet on your platform and they want to lock it in for a long time. So some of those attributes that exist on a traditional enterprise business don't exist on the PLG side. PLG is much more about, data-driven decisions. It's much more about how we can provide product at scale and not customize for our customers. And typically the contract terms are a lot shorter. And so it's a very different beast, PLG versus SLG, in so many regards. I think the challenge of the PLG side would probably be in the retention category, where things don't retain at the rates that you would see at one of those enterprise SaaS companies. And if you think about it, PLG companies kind of invert the go-to-market that SLG does. SLG sells you value, and then it proves to you the value after you've sold it. So you sign a contract with ServiceNow, you've been sold a lot, and now they got to go deliver that.
I hope this works.
So right, and so that you're taking a leap of faith. PLG inverts that. You provide value for free in most cases, and then you get asked to be paid once you've delivered that value. And so there's a lot less friction on PLG. There's a time to value is very short. Like you can get value on Calendly today if you sign up for it. Sign up for ServiceNow or Seismic, talking 3 to 6 months before you actually get value. So time to value is very short. The downside to all of that is that the switching costs are quite low. Like you can switch to another software quite easily. It's as easy as it is to stand up. It's kind of easy to get off of it. There's not a lot of sunk cost bias in your decision making. Where there would be, like you probably spent $2 million with a consulting firm to stand up ServiceNow. You didn't spend a penny to stand up Calendly. And so that retention becomes the bigger issue. And the way that I think about it at a PLG company, you interview for your job, once a month or once a year, where if your customers are on either monthly or annual subscriptions, and you got to prove value over and over and over. So I think the onus of driving value is so much higher at PLG companies. I think the not so dirty little secret of SaaS at enterprise companies is we make money in the same way that the gym does. We make a lot of money off people that don't show up. You don't get that. You don't get that luxury in PLG. That they're constantly auditing their users and making sure that people are actually using it. And so I find it to be the purest form of software, where you're only getting paid if you create value. Where at enterprise, that can be dubious at times, but at PLG, you got to show up every day for work and prove that value to your customers. So there's a pro and a con there.
Yeah, he said the quiet thing out loud about, the Planet Fitness gym contracts there.
Yeah, and look, that's showing up more and more today. Like I think the software buyer in 2024 is much more aware of what I just said than they were, or at least they care much more. I mean, look, we went into a pandemic. People bought software like crazy. They said, we got to go remote, buy whatever software you need. And, 2020, 22, 21. And then 2023 came around and everybody had to rationalize all that software that they bought as the world went back to normal. And I think people are asking questions that they used to maybe turn a blind eye to. And that's why you saw NDR rates, net dollar retention rates, and you saw growth rates kind of plummet across software in 2023. So we are in a different environment, and you got to prove value.
Proving value every day and showing up every day is the purest form of business, though. I like how you said that. I want to hit on something you just said, because you were at ServiceNow in a very different time and economic climate than you were at Seismic. and also a very different time than you are at Calendly. You've actually been through a couple macro shifts now at Calendly.
Yeah.
What's different about the climate in software today versus when you first started?
Well, when I first started, one of the coolest things about being at ServiceNow at the time I was there is that was the really early days of SaaS. For example, there was no AWS to do your hosting at that time.
Yeah, good point.
ServiceNow racked and stacked their own data centers. I mean, that is a materially different like capital outlay to do that versus just going and standing something up in AWS. So I think the barriers to entry are just so extraordinarily low now. And it certainly wasn't that way when we started. In fact, it was probably part of the reason why ServiceNow moved from San Diego to the Bay Area and had a large presence in Washington to have those cloud infrastructure people that simply didn't exist in San Diego. Today, you probably don't need those people because you're probably on Azure, GCP, or AWS. So it's just a very different barrier to entry type environment. And when you think about what happened in 2020 and 21, which I think were wild outliers, where you got to 40x multiples on or even more for fast growth companies. Valuations went through the roof. As a result, capital was close to free. And that drove how we operated our businesses. Like it was really loose. It was a growth at all cost environment. We made commitments to our employees through perks and all these other things that just weren't sustainable in a real environment because it was so competitive to attract talent. And now you find yourself in this 2024 era of I think a very different environment where interest rates have crept up. Investors are less inclined to deploy capital into SaaS companies at this moment. In addition to that, you have AI on the horizon, and that is changing the way that everybody thinks. I'm a firm believer that AI is a legitimate super cycle that will greatly change the way that we do everything, and we're in the very early innings of that. And so I think that uncertainty that exists in the market, I think specifically who the economic winners of AI are going to be is a really hard thing to determine. I think there's going to be a lot of companies that create these, maybe trivial or interesting use cases, but how in the heck do they monetize it if they're utilizing someone else's model and compute? So I think we're in a really wild time, CJ. Like I don't know what this is, but I think this is very, very different than other things that I've seen. And I think that there has been moments where that is a challenging moment to reset the expectations of your business with your employees and otherwise, that we're definitely in a new world relative to where we were recently.
Resetting expectations with employees, I think, has been one of the hardest challenges here. And then you also realize that a lot of your managers have only been taught how to hire people. They've never been taught how to part ways.
Yeah, I think we see that. And I think the way that you need to do it is approach it honestly and try to teach people what the drivers are here. I think it's human nature to get indexed to the highest valuation that something was ever worth.
Yeah.
So let's say you own a house and that house used to be worth $600,000 and today it's worth $400,000 for whatever reason. You're probably going to say your house is worth $600,000 because you're kind of pegged to that highest valuation. Or maybe you think that, well, it's worth 400 now, but it's going to get back to 600 because it was there once. And that's how kind of the human mind works. And, it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah. Employees are still anchored to having pet insurance.
That's right. And I think you need to presume that today's environment is closer to normal than 2020 and 21, because I think that's factual. If you look at like the 10-year average of SaaS multiples, we're closer to much closer to it today. If maybe slightly below it, but closer to it than we were in 2021. So
I love hearing you riff on the macro. And one of the things that people have been talking about is, hey, there's going to be this huge wave of M&A. And I mean, there has been some M&A, but I thought the way they talked about it, I thought companies are going to be getting scooped up left and right. And we were talking before the pod, and you kind of have a contrarian opinion on M&A in general. So what are your thoughts on how to create value as a privately held tech company in M&A?
So I think privately held startups are in place to drive innovation. Like their investors expect innovation. They expect you to take the world as it exists today, help your customers who are the heroes slay the villain of their day-to-day productivity and live in a better world. Like you're there to innovate and change the way that they work. I think rarely does M&A drive that type of innovation. And Peter Thiel's concept in 0 to 1 is like, if you're going to do something in the market, it better be 10x better than the alternatives that are available, or you might as well not do it. Well, I think that M&A rarely gets to some synergistic outcome for your customers that provides some great value prop. By the way, I think M&A can be terrific. As an example, Illumina, which is in biotech, not software, but they're early in their life, that company acquired a company called Solexa, which was sequencing technology where you sequence DNA. And now today, I think that business is broadly built on the technology of Solexa and everything they've been able to do. So there are definitely stories, Zoom Info can maybe be another one where M&A makes a heck of a lot of sense in the private markets. But generally speaking, as a rule, I think you should have really, really high bar to do M&A because one, it doesn't usually get you to a breakthrough value proposition for your customers. Also, like I hate to tell startups, but you're not well positioned to do M&A. It's like a nurse doing open heart surgery. I mean, M&A is super complex. It requires a certain skill set. And I'll be frank, I just don't think that a lot of privately held software companies have the talent to execute M&A at the way that it needs to get done.
And it's just a distraction a lot of the times.
And when you talk about expense, CJ, it's not really the price you paid to acquire the company. It's the opportunity cost and how much of your resources and your organization intellect goes into that. It can really stymie innovation outside of the M&A.
It's a bandwidth expense. Like you can only concentrate on so many things at a time. And if you're in this rare window of say 18 to 24 months to grab a market and you're using 6 of that to digest another company, that may not be the best use of your head space.
Yeah, I would think about it the same way. Yes.
All right. We're on contrarian opinions. We got here somehow. Me and you actually originally met because we were on a webinar together discussing benchmarks. Yeah. And I think you saw me go kind of Rain Man on that, where I just lose my mind over benchmarks. I don't think you're as high on some of them as I am. How do you use benchmarks in your day to day?
Yeah, so we do use benchmarks and they are valuable. In our annual plan, when we publish it to the board, for example, I oftentimes have a huge section associated to kind of comparing us to public companies, and maybe like Iconic puts out a paper, or OpenView, they'll put out papers. So I'll comp to all those in the annual plan. But I don't spend my day to day obsessing about benchmarks, and some of the reasons why is first, I think you can easily with benchmarking get to a sense of false confidence in a decision that you made because you're utilizing a false analog. Like if you're a privately held PLG company, should you really be looking at a roll-up of publicly traded SaaS companies? Like, first of all, you're private, not public. Second of all, you're PLG, not enterprise. Some of those are usage-based. And so I think that from a capital allocator perspective, it is interesting to do a lot of benchmarking because you could deploy capital here versus there. And so I know why investors like to do a lot of benchmarking, but as a hardcore operator, I think you got to be careful with it. Like you can use it as a guide. You can use it as, hey, investors are going to think about it this way. But I'd be careful about making detailed decisions about the business because you're probably, in my experience, making it off of what I would call a false analog, something that doesn't actually relate to your business in a really material way. In addition to that, I hate arguments that start with, we always have my prior company or everybody else. And in a way, benchmarking is everybody else. Like it's like, well, everybody else is this, and therefore we ought to do this thing. I hate that. I would rather be a critical thinker and think about who cares what everybody else is doing. It doesn't matter. Because there's a form of incrementalism in there that like bugs me. Like you'll miss the big moments to make big decisions if you're just comping yourselves to other people. And so I guess there's a fine line there, CJ. I appreciate benchmarking for what it can do, but I do think it has its own limitations, and you ought to be really thoughtful about how you use it.
It's funny that you say people pick their own comps because to every hammer, everything looks like a nail, and a lot of people walk around like, well, Snowflake's trading at 18x, so like I should too. It's like, dude, you're a vertical software company, like with a marketplace model serving the automotive sector. Like, why would that ever match up?
That's right. I think that you see that a lot. And I also think you see people very often, human nature, to use benchmarking data to drive a bias that they already wanted to drive towards. So we should do X because Y's got this, and therefore that's logical. And you're like, well, no, it's not logical. What you're comping to there makes no sense.
Yeah, you can use benchmarks as a weapon in the wrong way. Like, it just supports this business case that I already had to begin with.
It's kind of like your KPI that Scarpelli pushed back on.
I know, right? Here we are.
Like,
again.
what is this thing?
That stupid shirt. I want to talk a bit about the qualities of CFOs. And so you've been a CFO at a couple stops now. And what do you think separate the good ones from the great ones?
So I can speak for myself. And by the way, I'm not putting myself in the category of a great one. But I will say that financial aptitude is really important, but it's kind of like table stakes. And it's probably not the most important thing. Once you have a chief officer in your title, you have a purview over the entire business. Like, you should be held accountable for the whole business. I don't get the luxury of saying that, like, my team is good, your team is bad. I just never say that, within an organization. Maybe if you're at the VP level, you have that flexibility, but when you're chief officer, you're held accountable to the results of the overall organization. And if you think about it kind of on a spectrum, CJ, intern on one side, chief officer on this side, the intern is really indexed towards effort. Like, you put in a lot of effort and that's all that matters so long as you show up. On the chief officer side, all that matters is results. Like, a CFO can't show up to a board meeting and say, well, I tried really hard. It doesn't matter how hard you tried.
Yeah.
It simply does not matter. It matters on the results that you were able to drive. And so I think that the great CFOs, and again, I'm not trying to hold myself out to be one of them, but they're really focused on the organization as a whole, not just the financial side or the legal side. They're focused on the entire business. In addition to that, I think great CFOs can tell a good story, a credible story. When you go into like an investment round, or if you're a publicly traded company, I think the street or investors are oftentimes looking at the CEO to tell the good story, and the story that has some level of hyperbole built into it a little bit. Although Frank would never do that, but some CEOs would do that.
Yeah.
But on the CFO side, they're looking for you to be able to credibly tell the story of like what's actually going on. And so that ability to tell that all the way up at the very sophisticated investor level, all the way down to the very junior employee level is really critical. And you could be a phenomenal financial professional, but not be able to do that. And I think that would be a really good separating factor as well.
And I think those two things are linked, because it's impossible to tell a good story if you don't feel ownership over the results and performance of the entire organization.
Yeah, I would agree.
You said something to me before we started recording. It was move slow to move fast. What do you mean by that?
I've seen over and over in my career or people that report to me or people that I'm working with, you'll go into a meeting or you'll go into a decision and they start with, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to go adopt this new software. And you say, okay, cool. Like, that's great. Can you tell me what problem it's going to solve and explicitly how this piece of software or this decision you make is going to solve that problem? And I think people trip on themselves a lot in that conversation. And so what happens is if you were to jump on the solution that they're proposing, 3 months from now, 4 months from now, after you put a lot of work into doing that solution, you're going to find that it actually didn't solve the problem because you didn't understand the damn problem to start off with. And so I'm always trying to do a better job of, and asking the people that I work with to do a better job of, hey, maybe come to the meeting with not a solution. Like, let's discuss the problem and get a really in-depth understanding of it before we start to solution it. In addition to that, once we select a solution, let's not like make jumps to how it actually solves the problem. Let's get pretty detailed. And again, I'm using an analog of software when you deploy a new piece of software, but CJ, I can't tell you how many times in my career I've deployed a piece of software that didn't do the thing I thought it was going to do. And it's because I didn't take the time out of the gates to really solve for that. And back in the day, you had IT departments that would drive that, but we now have these citizen developers, which, by the way, my company is part of driving. Like, we like that citizen developer, but those people go make decisions to buy software, and they oftentimes don't know the complexity of the integrations or the complexity of the way that they solve the problem. And so it's very often that I'm asking people to slow down when it comes to decision making and show to me that you fully grasp the problem that you're trying to solve before I can sponsor whatever your solution is.
John, from talking to you over the last 45 minutes or so, it's very evident that you're very thankful for the people who have helped you along the way in your career and who have helped pave the path for you. And I feel the same way in my career. And we've both worked at multiple software companies along the way. Like, I think the years of, you work at GE and you get a gold watch at 50 years is kind of over here in terms of how you advance your career. How do you think about loyalty within the frame of working at a company or throughout your career?
I think that people who are focused on kind of longevity as being an example of loyalty are probably missing the point. Or people that, you already touched on it, but, not the hard, like the Netflix HR deck, culture deck is one of my, favorite pieces of business literature. And it goes through this concept of team versus family. Salesforce has a lot of Ohana, but Salesforce also on occasion does layoffs, don't they? And so I don't think, you can't lay off your mom or dad, can you? So I think that's important to note. I also think that, the sports analogy would be like, you're not going to leave someone on the court if they've missed, 50 shots. Like you got to pull them off the court. They're not performing, and you certainly aren't going to pull your mom off the court if she's not performing. So I think that this notion of family is a ridiculous one, and it's not one that I subscribe to. I think that people have a loyalty to their children, to their families, and they should always do what's best for them. And they're not going to do what's best for your business if you put it against that frame. And so, as a leader of a company, I'm always focused on, and this is what keeps me up at night, is how do I, as a CFO, expand the enterprise value of the organization such that I can create wealth events for the people that work at our company, for our investors, so they can get to a return. And to the extent, I can't do that and they have an option to go do that where they could drive something better for their family, then I just got to shake their hand and support them in that transition so that they can go do that. And I don't think that's being disloyal. I think that is them supporting their families, right? Now, when I do think about loyalty, though, is when you're in the employ of a company, that you do your damnedest to do the best you possibly can do to drive enterprise value while you're there. So I would rather not have the person that's at a company for 10 years that's just coasting. I'd rather have the person that's there for 2 years that is grinding day in and day out to make it a better company. To me, that's loyalty. Conversely, that person that's sitting there for 10 years just going through the motions, like that's not what is loyalty to me.
That was so well said. It's loyalty for the value that you're able to drive for others in that sense. It's not loyalty in the sense of like, hey, the clock's been running for 10 years now. I've been able to hang out this long.
Yeah, and listen, I think it's a total false assumption for businesses and employees to have like this sense of loyalty towards each other. I think that actually is lazy and can get to bad outcomes for both sides. Like I think that the business has to show up for the individual and the individual needs to show up for the business. And if that's the construct, you're going to drive better outcomes together.
My spidey senses go off whenever somebody starts to say like, hey, I've worked here for 25 years and I haven't worked anywhere else. Like as if that's a good thing. I always go, oh, so you don't know what good looks like, or like you haven't seen anything else. Like you only think there's one way of doing it.
Yeah, I think people can have tremendous 25-year careers. I wouldn't.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that, but like and this is a bias on my part that's probably somewhat incorrect, but I always do think that.
I mean, I will say when I look at resumes when I'm hiring for roles, and you have someone who is constantly in 1-year stints in their organizations.
Yeah, cuts the other way.
I do think that is a red flag, and I do push back against that. I think that when you make a decision to join an organization, you need to give it time to settle in and to create value and to learn. And by the way, as an employee, that is how you create wealth for yourself, because the way that vesting works on equity and software is typically a 1-year cliff. So conversely, I do think all these 1-year blips is a red flag.
All right, John, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So I usually ask people to give us an example of something they screwed up on the job, but you already gave us a really good one about sending that ACV file. I still feel for you there. The next one I like to ask is if you could tell your younger self something, knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
I think you have to be yourself, like warts and all, like whoever you are. Like I have a particular personality. Maybe it's a big personality. I wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit more than I always have a ton of respect for that, like person that has great economies of words and is like really, that's not me. And so I can't be that person. Right. And so I think be yourself. And I think that ServiceNow executive group, the CRO there at the time was named Dave Schneider. He's now a partner at Co2. Dave was himself, man, and I loved him. I loved his personality, but he wasn't your typical like executive. And we got to have fun conversations, more personal. And I feel like working with that executive team, and I just don't think you can get in your career very far unless you just are who you are and own it.
Yeah, it's hard to fake it for years at a time. You just got to kind of, like you said, be yourself. Bring your own brand to the table within certain guardrails.
You got to be surrounded by people that support that.
Yeah.
Yes, right. I mean, if at home you're a 14-year-old middle school boy, then don't bring that to work. So by the way, I want to be super clear. I'm not advocating for bring your whole self to work. It's a whole different topic. We don't have to go there. But I think you do need to be yourself.
All right, next one. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools do you use today to get the job done?
Yeah, so we've got NetSuite at the top. I oversee people here at Calendly as well. So our human capital management is Workday, and we also use Adaptive for planning. We're big net promoters of Zip on the procurement side.
Cool.
We've had a tremendous experience with that. And we've used some other tools in the past. And I don't think we've ever adopted a technology that has a better net promoter score within the organization than Zip. So shout out to Zip. We use Carta. I'm really pleased with that. It's probably my third company that I've used Carta.
What's the most recent tool you bought?
CJ, we're in 2024. No one's buying software right now.
Exactly. Good answer.
So that's going to be on the HR side. We just bought Trackstar to do our performance management. So by the way, being at PLG, we have a lot more analytics tools. So we have Tableau, but we just bought Hex. And Tableau will be more of our dashboarding software. Yeah. Hex is a software that, to my understanding, this is not my domain expertise, but allows us to do more ad hoc analysis off of our data lake.
That's awesome.
Hex is one that we just adopted, and everybody's super pumped on Hex. I'm not very familiar with it, but.
All right, last question I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've seen someone try to expense as a CFO?
So all crazy expense reports comes out of sales, right? We all know that. And I think my craziest, I pinged the team on this one because I thought this one was coming because I haven't been too involved in day-to-day expense reports, but we had a $3,000 courtside MBA seats for a seller and a prospect. And I remember actually having to reprimand that individual. Now, he had a really good story and he was doing what he thought was best for the company, but it was ridiculous.
Who was playing?
I don't remember. I think knowing the salesperson I bet you it was in New York, maybe Madison Square Garden, maybe the Knicks.
It's always like who their hometown team is too. It's not like, we went to the Warriors because like they're near where we work.
That's right. It's two people. And by the way, being a salesperson, you want to make sure you're selling value, not selling, courtside
experience.
Seats. So you gotta be a little, yeah. Please read the Challenger sale. Also, I think $1,500 bottle of wine is one that I got, which is probably not the most fun one. So,
John, this has been a blast. You're so well spoken, good storyteller, and I just really appreciate you taking us through your career journey.
CJ, it's an extreme pleasure, and thank you for the invite. And I promise you, I'm going to bring you 5 new listeners, which are my wife and my kids, and then all the SDRs that want to send me emails to get to know me a little bit more before they draft that email.
Hit John up.
It's the hardest damn job in SaaS. I love the SDRs, but just the email's not the right path. Team, come on, think of something better.
I know. Thanks, man.
All right. Talk soon. Thanks, CJ.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.